Welcome to Science and Wisdom Live, where scientists and meditators meet.
Welcome everybody on this full day of healing the body, healing the mind. I have to admit that my expertise is more or less in healing the mind and healing the body, but I started also as my spiritual career, so to say. I started also with initially things related with the body. I was a university student in the Netherlands, and then got some interest in martial arts initially, and I was really into sports. So I was quite fanatic in sports when I was young. And then through martial arts gone into philosophy, and that led me to study at a certain time also Chinese medicine in the weekends. And then after having studied that for 2 years, got into Buddhism. And then decided to change my life a little bit more drastically in the sense of becoming a Buddhist monk, as you can see, and study for about 2 decades the Buddhist tradition of philosophy and psychology. So we're going to talk about a few things this morning, and I thought to make it a bit more secular or universal. So Buddhism can be divided in different types of divisions, so to say. So that means that Buddhism can be seen as, basically we have to clarify, maybe it's good to clarify that. There's 2 aspects of Buddhism which has a secular or universal nature. That means that it can be studied and practiced without becoming a Buddhist, and without having too much engagement in particular direction. So that's kind of a universal aspect or secular aspect, if you like to call it. And that are, it's twofold. That means there's kind of what we call Buddhist science, or mainly referring to mind science of psychology, and philosophy. So Buddhist philosophy. So that means that mind science and philosophy can be studied and put into practice by everybody, among all forms of faith or religion or background or culture or race or color of skin. There's no difference, right? So that means that those 2 aspects just talk about general aspects of our mind and general aspects of the things around us, of philosophy as well as the mind itself. So the talk today will be based upon that particular secular or universal aspect. Then that's 2 aspects of Buddhism, right? Buddhist mind science and Buddhist philosophy. Then also Buddhist practice is kind of a third-fold division, which is then go into the direction of spirituality, in the sense of a person who makes a direction in their life, like I at a certain time in my life changed my direction a little bit into the Buddhist spiritual path, and then engaged in more Buddhist practice. So when we talk about different courses we conduct here at Jamyang Buddhist Center, we have secular programs. We have kind of the introduction on Mondays of Introduction to Buddhism, Introduction to Psychology, Introduction to Philosophy. That's more or less of a secular nature. And we also conduct different courses in Buddhist practice, more elaborate courses, long-term kind of study programs for those who are interested in proceeding a bit more. So that's, first of all, important to know that today we're going to mainly talk about aspects of the Buddhist practice, but presented in the first twofold division of a secular or universal nature, so to say. So then, before we engage in general speaking in every form of mind science and its philosophy or spiritual practice, it's always important to have kind of a correct intention or motivation. And why is that so? Because whatever we do physically, whatever we do verbally, when we talk with a person, when we act in a particular way, is always preceded by mental attitude, or motivation, so to say, or an intention. So that's a lot of emphasis in different aspects of psychology as well as philosophy, and Buddhist practice talks about these points. So maybe it's just for ourselves starting the day today, just think about why we're here, and for a particular purpose, to achieve more happiness, maybe, for self and others, and just try to generate kind of motivation for the day, that we're here for that particular purpose, to understand more about the mind, to understand more about philosophy, to understand more about the body, for a particular purpose, and well, to accomplish more happiness. And with that happiness, try to help others to achieve the same. So if you can generate that motivation, or like to generate a motivation for yourself, then we do that now for about, just a few seconds. Okay, so then, today I think I'm going to structure the talk in a kind of threefold kind of presentation. And well, talks about, terms we find back in Western psychology as well. Self-awareness is the first level we have to accomplish, and then the second level is self-discipline. And then the third level we can add like loving kindness and compassion, so to say. So what does it mean, self-awareness, self-discipline, and loving kindness and compassion? So we here together, and probably most of us, what is the main purpose of our lives? That's when I was like in my early 20s, that was kind of a big question. It's still a bit of a question, but it's kind of, why are we here and what's the purpose of this all? Right? So we ask those questions, and many people ask those questions. So what is the answer? There's many forms of faith and forms of psychology and forms of life or views of spiritual practice whatsoever. We have different interpretations, right? What is the meaning of life? But it comes down to the basic principles of what we like to acquire. That means happiness and not wanting suffering. In that regard, we're all the same, yeah? Whatever culture we come from, whatever race we fall to, whatever color of the skin we have, it's all the same, right? We have the same wish, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And that wish is very innate in the sense that it comes without effort. Even in our dreams, it's present. Yeah? If you have a nice dream, you like to stay in that dream. If you have a dream that is unpleasant, you want to get rid of that, And in the waking state, same thing. As soon as a headache comes up, you want to be free of it, and if you have a little bit of pleasure or feeling of happiness, you want to keep it, right? So that's kind of the aims in life, so to say, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So then the next question is, how do you accomplish that, right? So first we have to see why are we here, and what's the purpose of this all, and then we have to see how can we accomplish those different types of purposes in life. So yeah, there are many big variety of methodologies or forms of faith or forms of life to answer those questions, So of course we need a kind of good health. That's quite important, right? In order to have a certain amount of happiness. If there's too much suffering of sickness, either mentally or physically, then we don't accomplish that aim. So that's something we like to avoid, And so then we have to look into methods that avoids suffering and accomplish happiness. So then, for the point of view of that happiness, where is happiness? Is it outside or is it inside, or what is it? What is happiness, right? So happiness basically is a kind of feeling. We define in Buddhist psychology main minds and mental factors. And happiness is kind of a mental factor of feeling. So it can be pleasure, displeasure, or neutral, so to say. So we like pleasure and we like happiness, so we like to accomplish those types of feeling and like to eliminate the feeling of suffering, so to say. So then, of course, we need a certain amount of health, and that not only physical health, but also mental health. Yeah? Because the main aspect of achieving happiness, so to say, comes from a combination of both, right? And then ultimately, it depends on the mind, because even if you have a physical sickness, but if you're mentally very strong, you can cope with it so well. But on the other hand, if you have a mental difficulty, although physically you're very, very healthy, then it's more difficult to cope with, right? So the ultimate kind of development comes basically to the mind. And this development of the mind also depends on many causes and conditions. And if the mind is not ready, then physical exercise can bring great help. And we see that in many forms of scientific research, that people who are not ready to meditate or to do spiritual practice as such, or to do contemplation or try to train their mind, then initially some physical exercise has been advised. And that is true on every level of society. There's recently, I think last 2 weeks ago, there was kind of research being done with reintroducing yoga in the US, and then in the UK they do it already with some school children. And if you see the feedback of young children, we're talking about the age of 8, 9, 10 even, that they do very basically exercises of breathing, exercise of stretching, very universal secular aspects of yoga. And then they give the comment, say, "Oh, I'm so much more calm. And when I do it at home, I feel more calm. And when I do it in school, then I can concentrate much better, So they talk like that, right? So that's kind of an inclination or a proof that physical exercise is needed, especially when we're very young, and especially when we have some mental difficulties to deal with, then to go for a walk or to go for a run or to do some stretching or yoga. That breaks kind of the cycle of a thought pattern or process of thinking, right? So that's very needed. I saw the same thing when I was a university student, then also, you look for something else than the normal way of life, and then you start engaging in sports, and that brings a kind of more, at that time, a kind of more physical kind of what we call pliancy, or a physical kind of well-being, and that has an influence on the mind, right? So that's also true. So it's two-way traffic. So a kind of good, healthy body can influence a healthy mind, and on the other way around, the healthy mind can influence a healthy body. So that's many forms of scientific findings proves that changing or training your mind, training your brain, there are more positive aspects of optimism, or it has an effect on our physical body. Even surgeons who have to do an operation, when there's too much anxiety with the patient, they decide not to operate because it's too much blood loss and it's too complicated, right? So there's a correlation between the two, right? Body and mind. You can see that. And it goes to the further extent that there's a lot of research being done by people like Richard Davidson about the benefits of long-term meditation and the effect on our brains and the effect on physical health. So not planning to go in too much details of the different types of research proving both aspects, that there's two-way traffic, right? That the mind influences the body, even our breathing pattern. We know that whatever emotion comes to mind, the breathing is being influenced. And heartbeat is being influenced, and blood pressure is being influenced by your state of mind. That's pretty evident. There's a lot of scientific backup to prove the correlation between mental attitudes and physical kind of states, or the other way around, physical states and mental attitudes. So there's two-way traffic. So one aspect is that the mind can influence, and we know with the whole development or understanding of neuroplasticity that we can change our brain, right? Even after you become an adult, by training the mind. And also with more severe forms of issues, then it influences our behavior, like obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, how a particular structure in the brain causes us to think in a particular way and act in a particular way. So that's also true. So there's two-way traffic. The mind can influence the brain, and the brain can influence the mind. And here I make a distinction, as you can see, right? Brain, mind. So that means that in Buddhist psychology and its philosophy, we don't really say that the mind is something physical. The mind is something else than the physical brain. But there's a correlation between the two. And what is this correlation? That correlation can be causal, and that can be in a form of effect. Because a bottom-up, top-down approach, both is possible. Because if you have, for example, an OCD issue, then by release of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, you've been told to do something, particular behavior. You're influenced by that. There's no control at the time. So in that time, the brain influences the mind. The physical brain influences the mind. But through mental training, like in the research of Jeffrey Schwartz, for example, it talks very clearly about how to train in what he calls the power of mental force, that you actually change your behavior by a thought process. And this thought process helps us to change the brain. So that also you can see is two-way traffic. That means there's a physical activity that causes us to think with a particular consciousness, right? And there's also a possibility of thinking in a particular way that causes the brain to get rewired or get structured in a particular way. So that's, you can see there's a correlation from the point of view of physical appearance, of heartbeat, blood pressure, lung function in relation with emotions, right? Either positive or negative. There's kind of two-way traffic, you know. And there's also with our physical brain, there's a two-way traffic between the physical brain and what we call consciousness. So yeah, there's a lot of scientific research being done, but I thought we make this kind of talk a little bit more practical, as most of the setup of today is kind of a practical approach. So that's why that's the introduction, a little bit the scientific backup is there. And that's important because then we can see if we can prove that certain things are important for society, then we should put more effort in that direction. And we see that through with environmental issues, yeah, people protesting, that causes the government to think about things. And there's a change coming up, especially after the pandemic, when we see that we're not in control over our lives. Yeah, so that means initially we thought we were in control, but now with the pandemic we learned a lot, and now there's more interest in also environmental issues, right? Because of this interdependent relationship between ourselves and others and the rest of the people on the planet and the planet itself. Yeah, so that correlation is also there. So the correlation is not only there with the mind and the body, but also to relation with others and relation with our environment. You know, there's a constant kind of what we call a process of causes and conditions within us and with our external world. So yeah, that's a very principal aspect of Buddhist philosophy, that everything is interconnected, everything is interrelated, and we depend upon each other and others depend upon us, right? So yeah, so we don't go into those points too much. So that's just kind of the introduction that we're talking about eventually training the mind. Yeah, so we use physical exercise in the Buddhist or just in secular universal aspects to get a certain amount of health and physical and mental well-being. But there are also possibilities of training the mind. Yeah, so my presentation mainly will talk about those aspects. Yeah, so that means that the training the mind comes into those three steps I was just indicated in the beginning. That means self-awareness, self-discipline, and loving kindness and compassion. Yeah, it's kind of the three pillars of a secular approach, so to say. So why do we need those three pillars or three kind of levels? Because in order to change the mind, then we have to be aware. If you're not aware, then how can you change the mind? And so same a person who is occupied by a particular thought pattern or behavior, if you're not really aware of that thought pattern or behavior, how can you gonna change that if there's a need for change? For example, bad behaviors or issues with mental issues with OCD or whatsoever, you know, then and our negative thoughts. So if we go back to the principle of our aims in life, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, that a lot of suffering is created by our thought process. Yeah, we think in a particular way that causes us to suffer. You know? So that being caused by what we call destructive emotions, or emotions that actually causes us to be disturbed and we lose the peace of mind. Yeah, that's kind of a definition of affliction, is that what disturbs the peace of mind. You know? So those kind of mental states are to be disciplined or transformed, as we call it. So the first step is to be aware of those states. If you're not aware of those states, then it's very difficult to transform it. Yeah. With our body, same thing. When I was studying Chinese medicine for about 2 years in the weekends, I gave up parties when I was in my early 20s. And some people thought I was cuckoo and crazy, but I got more interest in other forms of life. And then I studied Chinese medicine in the weekends based on Tai Chi, Qigong, and acupressure, etc., etc. So it's very interesting, because there also you can see, if you're not aware of certain aspect of the body, then pain can come, or aches can come. Yeah, people who sit for a long time behind a computer in the office whatsoever, and the chair is not well designed, and they're not really aware of how they're sitting, then there's a possibility of pain, right? Yeah, so awareness is needed in both, our physical health and our mental health. So this awareness, how do we train in that? That's the first step. Because if you're not aware of things in your mind and in your body, how then are you going to transform it? Or how then are you going to change it for the better to accomplish those two aims in life? So that's why the first step is kind of self-awareness. So maybe we do it a little practical, then I will give you kind of a little instruction and we're going to try it out together. So awareness building, we start with a very basic, simple practice which comes from the practice, what we call the foreclosed placements of mindfulness. Yeah, that's kind of a practice that focuses upon points in the body, points regards with feeling, points regarding with mental attitudes, and points regarding with things around us. Yeah? So that means, the mind trainings or mindfulness of the body, feeling, and mind, and things around us, or phenomena, as we say. So that we call the foreclosed placements of mindfulness. That generates a kind of understanding of things, of our body and our mind and the things around us. That's what it basically works upon. If you train well in these foreclosed placements of mindfulness, then you generate more awareness. You become much more aware of your body and mind. That awareness is extremely important because then we can learn so much. Because then you can see, now my body is slightly, some tension is there. So I have to be careful not to sit in this position for a long time. Or you check your mind and see, look, now there's a kind of destructive emotion coming up. Some irritation or some anger is there. So I have to, be sure to transform this before it takes over, before I go into what is called an emotional hijack. So we have to prevent these emotional hijacks. And that can only be prevented by initial aspect of self-awareness. So the clue with self-awareness is that you become the observer. Yeah, you become the observer of the whole process. You don't get influenced by it. You just observe the process. Normally, when we get involved in irritation or emotion comes up, then it takes over, right? Or we sit too long in a chair in a particular position, then before you know it, there's an ache coming in the back of your body, or your mind gets overpowered by a particular destructive emotion like anger. Yeah? It's called an emotional hijack. There's no control as such. We just cannot do anything else than just to follow it. So if you become more aware of the processes of our body and our mind in that regard, then that's our first step in understanding, look, I'm not sitting properly. Or look, there's a kind of negative thought coming. If you're just merely observing, then it has great benefits. First of all, you don't get influenced by it too much, right? So same as there's a pain in the body, you observe it and then you change your position, right? So you don't get really influenced by it. With the mind, same thing. If you just observe, you have a distance, right? Mostly we're too close with emotions and they take over and we just entangled together with the emotion and there's no way out. And we just stuck, so to say. And that happens in depression, right? We go into a loop of negative thoughts, right? If you're in that loop, then it's very difficult to get out. And then this kind of mindfulness training will not straight away bring great benefit. Yeah? If you're in a kind of a strain of depression or stress, then it's better to do physical exercise first. To go for a walk or do something else you normally don't really do. That often you have to break this kind of cycle. That's quite important to do it initially. But then later when the mind calms down, then we can apply these aspects of awareness building. And the stronger your awareness building is, that later on you prevent these kind of strains from coming into being. Strain of the body and the strain of the mind. Yeah, you can see if you're more aware and you sit, then you feel a little bit of tension somewhere, okay, it's time to move around. Or when you walk too long behind the computer and it's kind of, before you know it, you get stressed. So you notice that it's getting more than 40 minutes or something like that. So you see you need a break, right? So then that's kind of awareness helps you to tell you it's time for a break. Yeah, and the more awareness you build in that regard, then we also generate this awareness with the mind. That means that as soon as a kind of disturbance of mind comes, negative thought or irritation, yeah, or strong anger or aversion, then you just be aware of that and you just observe. Oh, look at this. If you observe it in that way, there's much more control and there's more acceptance, right? We have negative thoughts and sometimes, oh, where do they come from? And but if you just have acceptance of it, that you can take a distance. Yeah, so kind of this neutral aspect of being the observer is very essential. Yeah, otherwise we get influenced by it, and we don't like to be influenced by it. We like to observe what's going on, right? So that means this awareness helps us to take a distance from a problem. It's true, right? If you have a problem in life, an issue, and you involve yourself emotionally, it's very difficult to solve it. But if you not involve yourself, but you look at a distance, you can help the people involved much better, right? Because you have a neutral perspective to the whole situation. If you're involved within the kind of difficulty, then you take sides because you're too involved with emotional kind of misunderstandings or being disturbed by it maybe. But if you have a distance, that's why it's very important sometimes to take distance and to have the acceptance. Okay, this is the case, this is the problem, and then you take distance, and then the clarity comes to mind, and then with that clarity we can analyze much better. So we need a kind of development of what we call self-awareness. Yeah. So yeah, that's the reason or the need why we have to develop self-awareness. And how do we do that? And that's the next step. What's the methodology? So for that methodology, we use what I said, the foreclosed placements of mindfulness, and a very secular or universal aspect of that. Yeah. So that means we start to be aware of our body more and be aware of feeling, yeah, and our states of mind, and then the things around us. Yeah, the 4 points of foreclosed placements of mindfulness. So among those 4 points, I think mainly focus upon the first 3 about body, feeling, and mind. So that means that in this process, you learn to observe. That's what we have to accomplish, right? We have to be the observer and don't get involved and be in the present. That's another quality of awareness building, is to be in the present, because we're mostly in the past or in the future, right? And that causes us to be disturbed. Yeah? But you never have the peace of mind because we always think about something, either in the past or either in the future. That means that, especially in modern times with the internet and mobile phones and the different devices you have, people, they go to bed and to wake up with a mobile phone. It's true, right? Instead of waking up and go to bed with your breath and relax, do some breathing exercise before you fall asleep and do some breathing exercise when you wake up, then you never get to rest because you always have this phone with different kind of, it's imprints in your minds, right? A constant kind of information coming. So we're never really in the present. And if you're never really in the present, then how can you generate more self-awareness? Yeah, the same as a lake in the Alps, when the lake is calm, when there's no wind in the early morning, with the blue sky, everything reflects in the lake, right? Everything reflects. The trees, the mountain, the sky, it's like a mirror, so clear. Then if you look at the North Sea between the UK and my home country, then sometimes when it's kind of wind force 9, something like that, it's very disturbed. There's nothing that reflects at all. So that means if our mind is too disturbed by destructive emotions, we cannot think clearly. We cannot solve issues very well. So we need to have clarity of the mind that is abiding in the present and takes distance. And with that distance, have acceptance. And with that distance, also have an insight in what's going on. And with this distance, you're much more in control because you don't get involved. Right. So that's kind of a few important aspects of this awareness building. Yeah. So how do we do that then with the body, for example? If you just sit, you don't have to sit in the formal meditative position, but it's always important to have the spine quite straight. Yeah? And the head is slightly bent forward. And then in the sense that the crown of your head and your spine, it forms one line. That has great benefits if you sit straight, because the mind influences subtle energies in different channels, and the subtle energies in the different channels has a correlation with the physical body. And when both are at peace, then it's much easier to contemplate and build this awareness. Yeah? So that's why the spine should be straight. It's quite important. And then the shoulders should be loose, of course, and the hands you can just put in your lap, loose, quietly. And then with this particular technique, you can either close your eyes or just not completely closed, that a little bit of light goes inside. Not that you see things, but that a little bit of light goes inside. That's initially it's not easy to generate, but on the long term, it brings more benefit. If that's too difficult, then sometimes you just close your eyes completely, and sometimes you train in that aspect of a little bit of light comes in, but not that you see. So that prevents what we call mental dullness or sleepiness, if you have that kind of little bit light. Okay, so then what we do now is just be aware of the processes in our body. So maybe we just take the breathing as an example, right? So just only observe. That's the only thing you're doing. Observe the breathing process. Don't force it. You don't have to count it yet. This just the first step is just to observe. Be the observer. Yeah. So that means when a thought comes to mind, you don't pay attention, you just let it go, like clouds in the sky. But just observe the breathing. What's going on? What do I feel with the breathing process? How does the in-breath go? So you think, oh, this is in-breath, and this is out-breath. So now I'm breathing in, it stays, now I'm breathing out. Yeah, so just observe the physical aspect of the breathing, let's say for about a minute or so, yeah? And just don't pay attention to any thoughts, right? Just be in the present and just observe the breathing process. So do that for about, let's say, half a minute or so. So then make sure that when a thought comes up, then don't pay attention, right? Just be in the present and just observe the breathing, how that goes, the in-breath and the out-breath, or the in-breath, and then the air stays a little bit, and then there's the out-breath. So just observe the process for another 30 seconds. Right, so then we can stop. So that's the first kind of level of we try to be more aware of what's going on in the present with the body, for example, the breathing, right? Then another aspect you can train in is, today I just summarize it, and then if you like the techniques, you can train the individual techniques for more longer period of time. So that's what we call one aspect of the mindfulness or close placement of mindfulness of the body, right? Then another aspect is feeling, which is always with us. And to be aware of feeling is also very important. And why is that so? Because, we like pleasure and we dislike suffering. So that means that whenever there's a kind of feeling of pleasure, we get attached or we crave for it or we grasp at it, And when there's displeasure, then, or feeling of suffering, then we want to be free of it. So that causes us sometimes to get irritated or strong aversion arises. If you meet a person you dislike, then you see that person, that causes a particular feeling of dislike, and that causes you to get annoyed with this person, like to be separated from this person, and even sometimes with the intent of saying something nasty, to prevent that person from coming closer or to meet the person again and again. So that means if you let these feelings come up, but you act in a very kind of biased way of like and dislike, then attachment and strong desire can arise with those objects we attach to, right? And kind of aversion can arise with those objects we don't really like. But if you become more aware of the feeling or the close placement of mindfulness of feeling, you become an observer again. If you are an observer, then you don't get influenced by it too much. You just observe, oh, look, this is a feeling of pleasure. Oh, look, this is a feeling of irritation. Or look, this is a feeling of suffering, right? So as long as you are the observer, you don't act and you're not biased, right? So that means learning to be the observer can be very insightful because you keep your mind calm, and with a calm mind, you can be in much more control over your emotional life. It's very important to have a calm and peaceful mind to be emotional balanced, so to say. With a lot of scientific backup proves that people that have a lot of meditation behind their belts, what Richard Davison and Danny Coleman calls the Olympic meditators, right? That means they have a lot of meditation practice being done, and they prove they find actually gamma waves was never measured before in the human brain, which is very interesting. They are beyond the charts, So that means that they produce a state of mind that doesn't get attached or doesn't get irritated. It's just like if you ride with something in a little kind of stream, a beautiful stream of water, when you ride their particular ward, right? It stays very slow and it goes. It's kind of very spontaneous, very fluxing. It's not, but our emotional life is mostly not like written in water, but written in stone. Our emotions are like very strong. It's like, in stone, that's very difficult to remove, So that's kind of a sign that we grasp too much to our emotional life. So we have to be more the observer with feelings, So there's many other forms of science and things about facial expressions. Paul Ekman, one of the world leader persons, facial expressions, saw so many faces all across the globe, in different cultures, different parts of the planet. And our emotional life has an effect or correlation with our facial expression, right? It's true, right? If you can see sometimes when a person is worrying or a person is unhappy or a person is very, very happy, we can see that in the face, right? So that means there's a correlation between our physical face and our emotional life, But if you talk with people who train in these practices, then it's more spontaneous. So when Paul Ekman met His Holiness Dalai Lama for the first time, then he made a very interesting comment. He said, I've never seen a face like this before. That means there is kind of spontaneous presence. There's no grasping at emotions. Yeah, normally when you talk about the difficulty in our life, that we can see in the face, right? That we think about it, and sometimes those emotions they stay for certain minutes. Yeah, but if you train well in certain types of meditation, like what we saw in the case of His Holiness and many other meditators, then it's more spontaneous. There's no holding on to its emotions, right? So there's much more free flow of consciousness, yeah, which is much more peaceful. So that this can be trained, the first and initial step also there is the training of awareness, right? And then awareness with feeling. So we have to train in a kind of awareness of the mental factor feeling, as we call it. So we learn through that process to be more the observer with feeling. And you don't act or get biased when there is either pleasure or displeasure, right? So you're more in the present at that time. Because when we have a particular feeling, then we think always, oh, I want this or don't want this. Or so we mentally fabricate a complete kind of picture of a particular reality which is maybe not really there. We create a kind of reality in our mind, and we think that reality is real reality, but maybe it's not. So that means that being more the observer, then you know the real reality because you're not biased. You just merely observe what's going on. Yeah, so that's kind of what we train with the close place mindfulness of feeling. Yeah, so how do we do that? Yeah, so we need the need for the close placements mindfulness of feeling is to be the observer and not to get biased and just be in the present and observe the different types of feeling without getting involved or without judgment, so to say, right? So that we have to accomplish. We have to accomplish this kind of awareness. Yeah. So that's the need for generating this awareness. So the next step is then how do we do that? What's the methodology, right? So the methodology is very similar as we did with the awareness of the breathing of the body. Is kind of just be aware if you sit, right? Just to be aware of what is actually what are the different types of feeling. Meaning you can feel, if you go from your lower part of your body, you can feel, for example, if you sit cross-legged, you can feel your right ankle or your right ankle pressing down in the cushion, and the upper part of your right foot pressing underneath your left knee, and the other way around with the other part of your body, and your hands, the right hand is softly pressing down on the left palm, and the left hand is pressing down on your legs, and the gravity is taking you down a little bit, and you feel the tension a little bit maybe in other parts of your body as well. So just be aware, so to say, of the different feelings in the body. Yeah, so that builds up a kind of what we call the close placements of mindfulness of feeling. Yeah, so maybe we give it also a try. Yeah, that means you sit again in the same kind of way as we just discussed, and then just only observe again, right? Don't think and don't judge. This is nice or this is not nice, or just merely observe basically what is the feeling in my foot, what is the feeling in my leg, what is the feeling in my hands, what is the feeling in my shoulders. So you can just, wherever there's a little bit tension, don't focus on it or something, just observe. Because here, the main thing we have to accomplish is the awareness building, right? Yeah. So then just observe from the different parts of your body, just a mere feeling, and don't judge it or just only the observance, same as we did with the breath, right? So yeah, let's give it also a try for about 30 seconds, first of all, just to just see what do I feel in my legs, in my hands, and the shoulders, other parts of the body. Just feel the different pressures. I mean, it's very subtle pressure, but there is feeling, right? Yeah. Or maybe a bit warm here and there because of the weather conditions, or a bit cold. Maybe sometimes the feet you feel a bit more cold and upper part of the body a bit more warm. So just observe what actually do you feel. So yeah, give that a try and don't think about past and future. Just be in the present. Yeah. Yeah, so give that a try for about, let's say, half a minute. So here, make sure you, when a thought comes up, just don't pay attention, but just mere observe, right? The feeling in the different parts of the body as we just discussed. Try to do that again for about half a minute. Right, so you can stop. So that develops over time, kind of more awareness of what do I feel, and how is that feeling being recognized. So that builds a kind of awareness of what we call the close placements of mindfulness of feeling, the second level. Then we go, so there's a graduation in easier practice and more difficult practice. So just the body itself, the breathing is basically a little bit easier. Then the feeling aspects to observe is actually the next step. And then the third step is to be aware of the mind and the different thoughts and that come and go. That's also very important. Why is that so important? Because if you have built awareness of the body and awareness of feeling, then the next step is to make it a bit more subtle in the sense of reflect it or bring it to the mind. Because eventually we have to be aware of the different things that comes to our mind and how do we react in particular events. Because our aims in life are wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And a lot of suffering is caused by mental states, right? So the real aspect of suffering, so to say, or unwanted aspects of life, are mainly caused by mental states. If you have physical issues, but mentally you're very strong, you can deal with it very easily, right? But if you have physical issues if you don't have physical issues, but mentally you have a lot of issues, then it's much more difficult to deal with those issues, right? So that means that, the mind is quite important in that regard, And if you be more aware of our mental processes or train in the close placements of mindfulness of the mind, then you bring it a step further than the awareness of body, the awareness of feeling. But now you try to be aware of what's happening in the mind. Meaning, now you listen to what I'm saying, right? You think, and then there's a thought process. Or this makes sense, or this doesn't make sense, or this is too much for me now, or I want to do something else, or oh, interesting, So that means that whatever we hear or we see, that we react mentally with a kind of reaction, a thought that comes to mind. Yeah. So then often it happens that we just follow that thought without thinking about it. Yeah, and that actually can cause a strain to come about that we forget to be the observer. If you're not your observer in that regard, then it's a possibility for negative thoughts and emotions to take over. And we like to prevent this emotional hijack, right? So the first step in preventing emotional hijack is to have awareness. Awareness of the body, awareness of feeling, and awareness of the mind. And that's something really lacking in the mind of a criminal, for example. A person who commits a crime, either physical or verbal abuse, which is motivated by mental intention or a destructive emotion. But that person, those individuals, they're not really aware of their inner well-being, or they're not aware of their inner life. They're not aware of their own feelings, so they're not aware of the feelings of others, right? But it means that many aspects of problems in our life, on the personal level as well as in society, are rooted in emotional states. Yeah, so that's why the term emotional intelligence is quite popular and is quite important. To be more emotional intelligent proves that the person is much more successful in life. In the early days, people thought if you're very intelligent, have a high IQ, you'd be very successful. But actually, that's not the case. If you don't have emotional intelligence, then it's very difficult to because we have relationships everywhere, right? In our family, in our working place, even now over Zoom and the Buddhist center, we have always relationship with each and other beings, right? So that means if you're not very emotionally intelligent, then also the relationships might be quite difficult sometimes, you know. So this aspect of emotional intelligence comes down to be aware, first of all, of what's going on inside your mind. Yeah, so you have to train is what we call this kind of awareness of the mind. Yeah, so the next step in the close placement of mindfulness is to be aware of the mind. And so the first 2 points, yeah, you can train of the body and the feeling, and then you see how does my consciousness react. For example, you hear something with your ear consciousness, right? Yeah, so there's an object out there, a sound. And that sound has a particular meaning of the words, mindfulness. And then what does that mean, mindfulness? So there's a kind of, the sound, that's the object, comes to your ear consciousness. You recognize that word. And by recognizing that word, you generate a kind of idea of the meaning of it in your mind. And then you react, oh, interesting or not interesting, or what is the meaning of this, right? So that means when we meet an object, yeah, so we hear the sound, or when you see something on the screen with your eye consciousness, then there's a reaction, right? There's a kind of, normally we react with the mental consciousness and the thought process. So here the clue is just to observe what is actually appearing to your mind, without judging. So you see something, oh, this is the color and the shape, right? Or you hear something, okay, this is this and this word, without really judging, liking or disliking or getting involved, so to say. So then also you learn to be the observer in the mental attitudes. You see that? So that's a kind of way of practicing the close placement of mindfulness of the mind. Yeah, you just observe, okay, there's a sound. Okay, how does it sound? And then how is that being perceived? And how do I react? Like here in London, sometimes the choppers, they come over, and then you say, oh, noisy, or the big motorcycles, they pass by, and then, oh, noisy. so it's just kind of, instead of noisy and getting irritated by it, you just observe, because you cannot prevent a chopper from flying over or the motorcycle passing by, right? So that means if you be more the observer, you prevent so much disturbance, and judgment of nice, not nice. Why now? I don't like this now, And then on top of, difficulties we already have, we create more kind of mental issues, right? So the clue is to be observer here as well. And that builds also another level of awareness. Yeah, we still in the first level, right? Building self-awareness. Yeah. So that is how we deal with things in daily life. Yeah, there's foreclosed placement of mindfulness. That's what it's called. Mindfulness means remembrance. There's two aspects there. Close placement of mindfulness, meaning in our meditation, like we just did too, right? We did one on the feeling of our body. Oh, sorry, the mindfulness of the body, right? The breathing process, to be aware. And we did one with the feeling of the mind. And well, the aspect of feeling itself, the feeling in your legs, the feeling in your hands, the shoulders, what is actually being felt. Yeah, so you train in those aspects in meditation, and you use what we call a kind of an analytical approach of just observing what's going on, right? Nothing else. So that kind of observance, or the aspect of the neutral aspect, you have to take as a mindfulness into daily life. So we cannot sit on a cushion 24/7. Yeah, we have to engage in our daily activities. So if you only sit on your cushion like in the morning for 10, 15 minutes and then forget about it all and then live your life as you used to be, then there's not much benefit, right? So mindfulness means to remember. So what you train yourself in the morning with, the feeling what you just did and the aspects of the body, then throughout your day you try to be mindful and remember those kind of instructions. So every hour or every 40 minutes when you sit, just close your eyes a little bit and be aware of the breathing, be aware of the feeling, right? That you keep the continue going of mindfulness training. If you do that on a regular basis, then the next level, what we talk about now, of the mind becomes easier. Yeah. So then when you just sit somewhere quietly, you train first, right? Or you walk outside. You go outside and you just see people walking, you see a tree, you see things, How does the mind react? There's a form and a color, and there's sound. If you just observe, then that by itself will cause a lot of peace of mind, because you're living in the present. And then the mind becomes like a mirror that you be more aware of things that come and go in the mind, Yeah. So that's the training of the close placements of mindfulness. So, and then we try to remember it as being called mindfulness, right? The real term of mindfulness in the Pali tradition, as well in the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhist psychology, means remembrance. That's a literal translation of mindfulness. Remembrance, remembering what? Remember a particular instruction or a particular kind of technique. And so in the morning when you do the close placement of mindfulness of your body and of your feeling, then you try to take this out into daily life and see how can I take this into, when I see something or when I hear something or when I taste something or when you drink something, Just be observed when you see something, you're thirsty, right? So then there's the kind of the feeling of thirst, and be observed. Before acting straight away drinking, just observe, okay, feeling of thirst. Then you see a cup with water or a glass with water, and then you reach that. And then your hand is going on the glass of water, and that's the feeling, right? So then you just observe the feeling. And then you drink and you just observe the feeling of drinking water. It's a very good practice in becoming aware. And then this next level of seeing how you react mentally becomes more possible to be observed. That kind of, oh, I'm thirsty. Okay, now I'm looking for water, right? So that's our reaction, right? Yeah, so you become more aware of our mental attitudes or mental reactions. So that's throughout your day. Of course, if you're in the office and people ask you to do something and you say, oh, stop, wait a minute, now I have to, I have to be mindful. And some people might get very, very annoyed with you, but you do it in secret, right? These kind of things you do in secret, kind of try to for your own, temporary, for your own benefit development. You do that, yeah. Yeah, so you be more aware with your mind. How do you react when the person says something to you? You just be aware, okay, this sound comes to my ear consciousness. That has this and this meaning. And I like this or dislike this. You can observe how your mind actually reacts by the things we hear, by the things we see, and by the things we feel, the things we touch, the things we smell. Same thing, Oh, look, there's some fragrance of a flower somewhere, and you just observe that. And how do you react mentally? So that's a very interesting development of what we call the close placement of mindfulness of the mind. Yeah. So that's the third level of close placement of mindfulness, and then the fourth one is the close placement of mindfulness of phenomena, the things outside. And then also that is also interdependent, right? Like how things appear to our mind and how things appear to your mind depends on many factors. Which direction of the object you are, and how the object is being, presented. So there's also an interesting correlation there between mind and its object. So the external levels of reality, so to say, which shows us kind of also very interesting development that you can see that things appear very concrete out there, but if you analyze, it's not as concrete. Like a flower or tree or plant is not always there. It looks like it's been always there, but it started as a seed and then grows and develops, right? So it's not that kind of existing from its own side out there. It's kind of a process. So then we try to be more aware of how things in reality, outside, so to say, actually abide. What is actually the nature of it? Yeah, so things disintegrate, for example, our own body disintegrates, That means that since we are born until the present, there's constant disintegration. That's kind of also a phenomena we can observe, right? So that means, you're getting gray or hair is falling out or wrinkles or kind of, there's an aspect of what we call decay or impermanence, right? So that's also kind of an aspect of phenomena out there, right? You put paint on your car or on your house and that disintegrates moment by moment, right? Although it appears very concrete out there, but it's not like that. So you can see that's a little bit more difficult to contemplate. So as an initial practitioner, we mainly focus upon the first 2 points and then take it to the third point. So that means the mindfulness of the body and then the mindfulness of feeling and then the mindfulness of our consciousness. And then we take it outside, the mindfulness to be aware of the things around us. And there's also there's a correlation between all these 4 points, right? That means that when you see an object or you see a person, if you see a person you like, you say, oh, nice, right? So there's eye consciousness perceiving the shape and form of the person. Yeah? And then you think, oh, nice feeling, Or a person you dislike and just merely hearing the word of the name of that person is kind of causes you to get irritated. Yeah, so that means that it's very interesting. There's just a sound, right? There's nothing else. But the sound is being perceived and then there's a feeling with it. So that the sound is being perceived and the feeling that we cannot really prevent from coming into being. Because feeling we consider as an omnipresent mental factor, That means it's always present. But how we react, that we can still deal with. So if you train in this observant aspect of being the observer, then we can be more aware of how the feeling actually, what it actually is, instead of judging, right? So you see the first 2 levels of close placement of mindfulness can bring great benefit. And then you just observe how you react. And if you observe an event, how you react, you learn so much, Because if you have a person you dislike, and then you have an unpleasant feeling when you meet that person, and you get irritated, but if you just be the observer here, you be much more control. You don't let the irritation control you. And so that's kind of, based on these mindfulness trainings, you can see there's a kind of building up self-awareness, the first step. Yeah, so that's our first kind of process, self-awareness. Without self-awareness, it's very difficult to train the mind, right? Yeah, if you're not aware of your inner being, how can you transform your inner being? So most of the time, our focus is externally, right? About the objects and things on the internet and what we see and what we hear. So we never really within, So this observance of these 4 aspects, or the first 3 aspects of close placements of mindfulness, helps us to bring the mind inside and observe, So then if you have built up this kind of self-awareness, then we go to the next level of mind training, which is self-discipline or transformation, so to say. And so if you're more aware of things that go on in your mind, then the next step is kind of, how do I transform this all into a constructive way of thinking, or transform it into more happiness and eliminate suffering? Yeah. So how do we do that? That we do what we call with an analytical approach, or analytical meditation, so to say. And this analytical meditation is preceded by a concentration meditation. So in order to build your awareness stronger and to come to this self-discipline or this transformation process, you need to train in certain aspects of the mind. So that means that we have to observe something, and we have to be in control which thought to follow and which thought not to follow, right? So how do we do that? So that's the need for this method, is to channel your mind in a particular direction you want to channel it, right? To transform your mind in a particular direction you want to transform it. So you need to do that, because then you can prevent negative thoughts from coming into being, or not following negative thoughts, right? We don't like negative thoughts, and we don't like disturbance of mind. So we need something or methodology that helps us to be in control, so to say, of the mind. So then we first accomplish by the power of a concentration meditation. That means that you learn to concentrate your mind. So in the foreclosed placements of mindfulness, as we just discussed, the main purpose of that, there's many levels of this kind of training, but from the secular or universal aspects, the main purpose is to be aware, right? To generate the kind of awareness. Okay? So then the next step is you want to control your mind, or transform your mind, so to say, in the sense of not following negative thoughts and following positive ones, right? So that we can only do by generating a more concentration. A concentration that helps us to direct our mind to something we like to direct it to be directed to. You know, it's true, right? If you read a book and you're distracted, then a few pages down and you say, oh, what did I read again? You know, you're completely wasting your time by being distracted. So that means if you know how to focus your mind, you absorb much more. If you know how to focus your mind on an object, you know how to prevent distraction, you see? Because if you don't get rid of the distraction, then that happens, no? You read and then, you know, for a few minutes you think, oh, what did I read again? You know, because the mind is outward, it's not focused. Yeah? So in order to direct the mind to constructive emotions also, we need a kind of powerful tool of building up awareness, but on top of awareness, we have to have this self-discipline, or this transformation, that the mind becomes in control, right? Which thought to follow and which not to follow. So that kind of control happens by the power of two mental factors, you know, or two kind of, states of mind that helps us to go in that direction. So what are those two mental factors? We call that alertness and mindfulness. Yeah, so here, alertness means to be alert what's going on. So you can see this alertness already needs the preceding aspect of this awareness, right? Yeah. If there's no awareness, you can never be alert when things go wrong. So that means first you can see that the basis is the self-awareness, then the self-discipline needs the methodology of alertness and mindfulness. You know? So that means that whenever a negative thought comes up, you have to have this kind of aware of it, that's the awareness, and then be alert, okay, I shouldn't follow this negative thought. And then if you have this observance present, you don't get involved and you can still take action. Because when this alertness comes, you say, oh, look at this. My mind gets now irritated and I don't like this. You know? Without getting involved, you still have a chance to do something. You see that? If you don't have awareness and you don't have alertness, it just happens to you. You just get angry and before you know it, 1 hour is just gone, right? Yeah, or the whole day is gone. So that means that first is this awareness. You see the irritation coming. Yeah? So this awareness. Then with this alertness, you recognize it. Oh, irritation is coming. Then with mindfulness, we have to direct our mind to an object of concentration. Yeah? So you can see if you concentrate on a particular point, you prevent your mind from wandering off. You prevent your mind from thinking about something else. You see that? So that helps us to get concentrated, and that helps us to channel our mind in the direction we want to channel it, or transform our mind in a direction we want to transform it. Yeah? So we need this mental factor, alertness and mindfulness. So alertness means it's just aware and recognizes you're getting distracted. With mindfulness, you remember, oh, I'm supposed to be doing concentration now. Yeah, you can see, so if you build concentration on top of self-awareness, you can direct your mind to the object you're concentrating at that particular moment. And you're in the present, and the clarity of the mind is there. You see? So that's a very powerful tool. In the next level, building up awareness, is this kind of self-discipline. So these kind of mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, are very similar. As I just mentioned, the research by Jeffrey Schwartz regarding dealing with OCD, right? That what he called the power of mental attention and the power of mental force actually uses the same two kind of mental factors to direct your mind in a particular direction. Yeah. So how do we do that then in a practical way? Meaning you need an object of concentration, right? And this object of concentration you decide before you start. So let's say, for example, the breathing process, but this time we count the breathing process, right? In the foreclosed placements of mindfulness technique, we just observe. But now we want to take it to a next level, meaning we want to use it as an object of concentration. That means that when we are breathing, we're breathing in a natural way, and then we count. Every in-breath as 1, out-breath as 2, in-breath as 3, out-breath as 4, and you count from 1 to 10, and then you start over counting. And then whatever thought comes to mind, you should not pay attention to it at all. So with alertness, you be aware, oh, look, now I'm thinking about something of the past or the future. But with mindfulness, you remember, I'm supposed to be counting my breath now. So mindfulness brings your mind inside again, brings your mind back to the counting of the breath. So you can imagine if you do this concentration meditation well on a regular basis, you'll be able to direct your mind to a particular object. In this case, the counting of the breath, right? So then later on, when there's negative thoughts coming to mind, you're aware of that, then you're alert, and then with mindfulness, you'll be able not to follow it. You see that? So that's a technique that helps us to go in a particular direction we want to go. Yeah? So that's a very, very sophisticated technique. If you train well, you become actually in control of your mind. You know, that's what it is. Yeah. So why the breath? Because the breathing pattern by itself has a relaxation, right? If we emotionally, challenged or it's true, right? The whole breathing goes strange, right? Goes unnatural. But if we take a few deep breaths, then it relaxes, isn't it? Yeah. So relaxation helps us to get clarity. It's not the main purpose of meditation, but it helps us to get clarity. So that's why we use, in this case, the object, the breath, as the factor or the object of concentration. Yeah. So want to try it out for a minute? Yeah. So same thing. We sit in the same position as I said before, and then what you do now is not merely observing, because now the methodology is slightly different, right? And the aim we like to accomplish is slightly different. With the mindfulness of the body, as we did previously, of the breathing pattern, and just be aware, the purpose of that meditation is to become aware. That's it, nothing else. Now the purpose of our meditation is to generate concentration for a particular purpose, to control the mind, right? Yeah? So that you have to be clear about that there are different techniques, and the different techniques have different methodologies, and they have different results, right? So that's has to be clear. And then you see we go in different stages. From awareness, we go now to self-discipline, right? The next level. Yeah. So how do we do that? Then just make sure that the breathing is natural, and you count the breathing. Yeah. So count every in-breath as 1, out-breath as 2, and then you count from 1 to 10, and then start over with the count. And then make sure that you be aware. As soon as a thought comes up of the past, the future, with alertness, you notice that. And with mindfulness, you bring your mind back to the counting of the breath. Nothing else. Thought, they can wait, we can think about things later. Now, the only thing we're doing now is the concentration of the breath. Yeah, so let's give that a try for about a minute or so. Yeah. So count every in-breath as 1, out-breath as 2, in-breath as 3, out-breath as 4. And then count from 1 to 10 and make sure you use the two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, to make sure that you're supposed to be that you do what you're supposed to be doing, right? The counting of the breath. Yeah, so let's give it a try for about a minute. Right, so make sure now here also that as soon as the thought comes up, don't pay attention, right? The only thing you're supposed to be doing is counting up the breath, nothing else. And so be aware and alert, and then in mindfulness, bring your mind back to the counting. Yeah, so try another 30 seconds. Right, so you can stop. So if you train in these two mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, to focus on a particular object, as we just did, then throughout your daily life, you also should have this awareness, as we developed in the previous method of the foreclosed placement of mindfulness, and then be aware what's going on and be aware how you react, right? And then the process of how you start reacting, because you are aware and you are distant, right? You're the observer, so to say. Then you use this kind of mindfulness to remember that you don't like to follow this particular negative thought or this particular emotion or something like that. And so that means you train, and the stronger your mindfulness is, the more power of the mind there is to follow your intention. That's what it is. Mindfulness means to remember your intention. Yeah. So you can see it's building up to self-discipline. You see that? Yeah. Then another aspect of self-discipline is what we call an analytical meditation. That means we eventually, in order to solve mental issues or to solve destructive emotions, so to say, we have to counteract them with a kind of analytical approach. Why is it so? Because, for example, if you have a dream, a disturbing dream, and you wake up in the morning, and the way to get rid of that unpleasant feeling or the disturbance, what you do, you take a glass of water, you sit on your bed, and you think, oh, this is just a dream. I'm in my room, everything is fine. So that means the power of the analytical approach, everything is fine, I'm just in my room, proves that the dream was a wrong form of consciousness, right? So that means by the analytical approach, we counteract this disturbance of the mind. Yeah, so for all our other destructive emotions, also we need a kind of analytical approach eventually to counteract them. What we did up till here is very good to be aware, to observe, to focus your mind in a particular direction, right? But eventually we have to transform the mind. We have to transform these kind of disturbances into constructive ways of thinking. And that's only possible by the power of an analytical approach. Because our destructive emotions, they use the very similar aspects of our mind. Meaning, when we get irritated or angry at a person or situation, we think, I don't like this person, I don't like the situation, because of this, because of that. So our mind, within a few split seconds, is capable of analyzing some things and come to a conclusion and believe that, right? But if this analytical approach, when the time destructive emotions are coming up, if this analytical approach is correct or not, that's the question. Yeah. So in order to transform them, we use a kind of what we call an analytical meditation. Yeah. So how do we do that? It's kind of it's very logical. You again have to have this awareness because you have to be the observer. You don't get involved, right? That's a very important aspect. Because if you get involved, then it's too late. Emotions takes over, and then it's better to go for a walk. If you're very irritated and then you think, oh, now I have to meditate on patience, then you get even angry at the thought of meditating on patience, right? So you need a break. So in those cases, when the mind is too heavy loaded, you need to go for a walk or do some exercise or break that pattern, right? Same with a child, when a child needs something or a child is in this race of fear or combined with sadness and anger and irritation. You have to break the cycle. So with little children, sometimes it helps them just to distract them. Oh, look on the tree, oh, look there, and birds, and then their mind completely shifts like that. Because they still not hold to things as we do as adults, right? It's very easy to shift. That means you break this cycle of their thought pattern in their minds, right? So for adults, it's a bit more complicated because we grasp much more to these kind of aspects of our thoughts. So then a little distraction doesn't really help, but we need a bit more kind of severe distraction, meaning go for a walk or do something you never did before, or go to a place you've never been before, or meeting people and you like to hang out with. And that conversation, sometimes one conversation helps you to break that cycle, right? Yeah. But when that cycle is being broken, then to prevent the next event from coming into being, we use what we just discussed to prevent it from coming into being. First the self-awareness, then the self-discipline. At the beginning of the self-discipline is not to follow particular thoughts, and then to counteract with an analytical approach. Yeah. So how do you do that? By analyzing the faults of the destructive emotion and contemplating the benefits of the antidote. For example, you contemplate the faults of anger again and again, yeah, from a neutral perspective, and then you contemplate the benefits of practicing patience. Yeah? Or if you have a bad habit in your life, you contemplate the faults of that habit and the benefits of changing your mind or to get rid of that habit. Or addiction. If you have an addiction or something, you think about the faults of the addiction and the benefits of being free of it. So that means in this analytical approach, you get convinced about the faults of a particular negative state of thought and the benefits of a constructive one, and that helps you to transform, right? And that transformation you do in a kind of analytical meditation. So you sit and you observe, and you said, oh, yesterday I got angry at this person, and what happened to my mind? How did I react? How did that influence my own well-being, and how did that influence somebody else's well-being? And you see that anger often is a kind of destruction for self and others, right? So then you come to that conclusion and you focus on that conclusion. Yeah? In a similar way, you analyze, if you keep your mind cool and you practice kind of what we call patience, meaning the mind of patience doesn't mean you be a vegetable or you be a doormat or something like that. You can still take actions, but the action is based on peace of mind inside. You can still No, a school teacher or a parent can still be quite direct with the children, but inside motivated by compassion and patience, right? So that means that you contemplate the faults of the destructive emotion and the benefits of the constructive one, and the more you're convinced, then the mind starts to shift. And that's what we call transformation. Yeah? So to suppress emotions is not good. Yeah? We have to accept them, and on top of this acceptance, we transform them. That's the whole process in an analytical meditation. Yeah? So that's to make the picture a little bit more complete. Yeah? And then I said the division of my presentation is threefold, right? Self-awareness, self-discipline. Yeah, so we cover those two. Basically, self-awareness with the foreclosed placements of mindfulness, right? Self-discipline with the concentration meditation and the analytical meditation, right? And then, of course, we try to extend these kind of aspects to other beings, because we just one individual having this aim in life of wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And the person sitting next to you, or I should say next to you, maybe just person who's sitting on the other side on the screen, they have exactly the same wish, right? Wanting happiness, not wanting suffering, exactly the same. There's no difference in that innate nature of our aims of life, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So then we try to extend to others, in the sense of we try to think about there's so many more in number who have exactly the same wish, not wanting suffering and wanting happiness, right? So then we try to see that often when we have a problem, we think we're the only one on the planet or the only one in the universe who has this amazing problem, you know. But actually, when you talk with others, you can see that other people are facing the same issues, right? So we are interconnected, as I said before, and we have the same wish of wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. So then you try to generate a wish for others also to be free of these disturbance of mind, right? And that's what we call kind of compassion. And then you think, may others always abide in happiness. And that's basically what we call or define as loving kindness. Yeah, so that's kind of the third pillar, so to say, of generating loving kindness and compassion for others. Yeah, so this kind of, in short, we talked about the importance of self-awareness by the power of the foreclosed placements of mindfulness. Yeah, that kind of secular or universal aspect of that. Yeah. Has much more profound aspects to it for those who like to engage in Buddhist practice in relation with viewing ultimate reality, etc., etc. Yeah. But there's a very simplified aspect of the foreclosed placements of mindfulness. So that brings this self-awareness, right? And then with concentration meditation, using the mental factors, alertness and mindfulness, you learn your mind to get focused on things. And that you learn your mind to direct your mind, as we did with the meditation on counting the breath. Yeah. So then you can see you already start to get a more undisciplined or aspect of the mind. You know? Then the real transformation happens when you actually engage in this analytical meditation, contemplating the faults of destructive emotion and contemplating the benefits of the constructive one, and then it will shift. Because the more we're convinced about something, the more we like to go in that direction. That's actually the nature of our mind, right? Yeah. And then we try to think about others to be in the same boat as we are, and we try to generate a wish for others to be free of suffering and always abide in happiness. Yeah. And then, we come to the conclusion of this talk, and then we mostly dedicate or make a short prayer or short intention, if you wish, to in this line. So you can think, may I, or generate more self-awareness and self-discipline, and be able to help others to achieve the same, right? In the form of this loving kindness and compassion attitude. Yeah, so you can make a short prayer for yourself, or commitment or intention, as you like to call it, Janjo semjo rinpo she magye panang gige chik. Kyewa nyamba meba yang gone gonde